Hi, welcome back to Swedish Plant Guys. We get a ton of questions from you guys and that is fantastic. Just keep them coming all the time. I promise you that we read every question you have. However, we do not have the time to answer you them in writing because almost every answer requires a small novel from us to be able to help you the way you have to be helped. So what we do instead is that we try and have these Q&A videos. And we take the questions we take up here in the Q&A videos, we try to gather questions that has been coming up many times. So that in answering one question, we're actually answering a lot of your questions at the same time. So we're trying to help you as much as possible. But please don't stop asking us questions because we read all of them and we try and answer as many of them as possible. But we do it here in the Q&A videos. So without ado, we start with question number 1. Can I use artificial lighting for my Dracena massangiana corn plant? And how long should I apply daily? This is a good question because usually when we make these videos, we often talk about sunlight. We never talk about artificial light, which is very often used indoors because it can be in rooms where you don't have any sunlight, or it can be in northern facing windows that you don't have that much sunlight. So for the Dracena plant, you can use artificial light. That works fantastically. You don't need to have direct sunlight or natural light. You can make it artificial. And what we try and recommend is that you use some type of newer LED lighting, or you use fluorescent lighting, the long tube form of lighting. Those are the two best ways to give artificial light to your plant. Now there are special manufactured plant lights that you can buy, but you don't have to. Of course, they are optimized in the light spectrum so that your plant is going to get all the light that they need. However, we've found that our personal experience is that you can buy almost any type of fluorescent light or LED light, and that works just fine. So you don't have to put a lot of money into buying specialized artificial lights. So just add light whenever you need to, and concerning Dracenas, that is not a problem. It's just a positive thing. Question number 2. My Dracena's leaves have turned yellow, especially at the tip. And what should I do? Well, this is concerning, of course, our Dracena videos. And this is a question that turns up a lot. Usually we get a lot of questions about the leaves of the Dracenas. If you get a brown tip on the leaves, you get full brown coverage all over the leaf, you get yellow leaf, so on. So I thought I'd combine this question with a lot of questions and answer them, all of them, what type of damages the leaves can get on a Dracena, okay? So starting, if you get a brown tip on your Dracena, I actually have it here, I'm going to show you. Here we have some brown tips on leaf, and this brown tip is dry, it's bone dry. I can pull it off like this, and it just crumbles in my hands. Now, if you get this is what we call a mechanical damage on the leaf. You can get this in different types of ways, but the most common is that your Dracena is placed somewhere where you usually move and touch the plant. So you touch it like this. When you do that a lot with a Dracena, you will get that dry tip. Because what happens inside of the plant is that the plant is unable to push the water all the way out to the very end of the tips. And that is because you are there and touching it all the time. So this is not a dangerous injury on the plant. However, it does make the plant look a little bit old, or it damages the overall look of the plant. What we do is actually what I did just now. You just take your fingers and pull it off. I do not recommend you to use a scissor and try to cut it off, because then you usually cut off some of the green as well. But if you take your fingers around that brown tip and just pull a little bit, you're going to get only the brown tip and not anything of the leaf that is still alive. So that is the first thing when you have a brown tip that is dry. It's a mechanical damage. You can also get it from the Dracena is standing somewhere where there is a draft. There is air that is moving the plant all the time. Usually that means also that you get these mechanical damages. So move the plant to somewhere else and it will probably go away. Okay, the next thing is that if you have a Dracena that has a brown end of the leaf that is not dry, it's actually, it almost feels like it's still alive, but it's getting brown. And it can also get yellow as well. So brown and yellow, but not dry. It's the same as if it was alive. Sometimes it can even feel a little bit droopy or a little bit wet. If you get that, then you have a whole other problem. Because this is usually a sign that you have some root problems with your Dracena. And usually it's because you have watered the plant too much. When you damage the plant, one of the first things, when you damage the roots of the plant, when it can't get any air, one of the first things that happen is that you will see those brown tips or yellow tips that are not dry. So what would you do now? Well, you have to stop watering first of all. Stop watering and try and feel the soil all the way down to the bottom of the pot. Is it very wet? Yes, it is. Then stop watering it and let it dry out completely. Another way to go is that you maybe pick up the plant and repot it and take away all that very, very wet soil that is around the roots and add some new, fresh, dry soil. And then be very careful with how much water you give it, because the roots need to dry up in between watering concerning Dracenas. If it doesn't do that and you give too much water, the roots cannot breathe and you will get problems. The first thing you're going to see is those brown tips that are not dry. They're exactly like the plant itself. Now, the next thing is that you can get some leaves you have all of the leaves of the plant is turning a little bit yellowish. Or another way to put it is that the color is fading somewhat. It looks to be a little bit yellow, but it's probably just that the green color is starting to fade away. And if that is of the whole of the plant, then you have another problem. Usually you have a pest infestation. You have a pest problem. Some of the pests that attacks the Dracena you can't see with your naked eye. They are so small that when you find the problem, it is a big problem. There are a lot of them already. And this is one way to notice that. You can be proactive and look at your plant very often. If you see that because you think that the whole plant is starting to fade, however, it hasn't started there. It's just that you've looked at it and now you see it. But if you are very, very careful and look at the newest leaves, do that every time you water the plant. Look at the newest leaves on your plant and see. If you start to see that some of those leaves are starting to lose their colors or fading a little bit or turning a little bit yellow, then you might have seen the pest problem at an early stage, and then it's really easy to take care of. Just go out to your local store and find something to deal with it. Or you can just take it into the bathroom and rinse it off quite hard with some water, and do that every day for 2 weeks. That works with most pests. So this is just a generalization, but if you look at the newest leaves, that is where you will find the pests the first time, because that is the delicacy on the plant. That is the nicest thing, the thing that the pest will attack first. But if you see that the whole plant is starting to fade, you probably have a big problem. You can still go to the store and try to remove the pests, but if it's gone too far, you might not be able to save it. So my experience is that every time you water the plants, always make sure to look at the newest leaves. Are they looking as good as they should? Because those leaves should be perfect. They should be standing and looking great, better than all the other leaves. If they're not, then you have a pest problem. The next thing is that you look not at the leaves, but that you see that some of the stems are changing color. We have two types of Dracaenas. One of the types is like this one here, the Dracena cinto. It has the green stems like this. Usually they are very small and green. And then you have like the Massangiana, Dracena Massangiana, which has the very thick and brown stems instead. Two different types, but both types can get you can get color changing on the stems as well. If they are turning brown or turning yellow, then you have a problem. And usually 9 times out of 10, when that happens, it means that that stem is going to die. You will not be able to save it. It has gone too far. And you have a problem usually with the roots. The roots have died so much that the stem can no longer transport water inside of them. And that is why they're turning color. So if you see that on a Dracaena, what I usually do is that I take that stem away from the pot. I pull it out, and hopefully you have a Dracaena that have more stems than one, like this have 3 stems. So it will not mean that the whole plant is damaged. It's only that stem that is damaged. So take it away before it becomes a problem for the other ones. But if those roots on that stem have had a problem, you could have problem with the other roots as well. So, and usually, like always with the Dracaena, it's the watering. You've probably watered too much, so see to it that it dries out completely. And look in the soil so that you don't have other problems. It can be a fungus problem, and you would usually see that with some type of white fungus in the soil. If you find that, repot it, rinse the roots off, and you will probably be fine. So, if a stem starts to change color, take away that stem, because you can probably not save it. So you don't have to struggle with it, just take it away. Moving on to the third question. What I'd like to know is about peeling the bottom of the leaves of the Dracaena, because I want the Dracaena to grow in heights. Now, we get this question a lot, and the question is that if you, as the plant grows, pull off the lower leaves on it, it will trigger the plant to grow faster. This is not an experience that we have. I would never recommend anybody to pull off any leaves of a Dracaena. Just let them be. The Dracaena, it grows quite fast if you treat it well, if it's healthy. It's going to grow quite fast. So you don't have to do that. And you will not trigger it to grow even faster. Because you can look at it like this. What you're actually doing is that you're peeling off some of the sun panels that the plant wants to be able to absorb the light and the carbon dioxide from the air. So by taking away leaves, you're actually hurting the plant more than helping it. So leave the leaves on, just take care of your Dracaena as well as you can. And when it thrives, it will grow, and it will grow quite fast. Question number 4. I would like to know how I can stimulate the growth of the new sprouts on a Dracaena marginata. I have cut the stem, it's in the soil already and has 3 pops, but only one has grown bigger, the other 2 have stopped. What can I do to stimulate the growth of the other 2 as well? I'll try and explain what she's meaning here. She has cut a Dracaena stem off, and from that point where she cut it off, there are 3 new buds. And one of those buds has started to grow, but the other 2 buds are dormant. They're not doing anything. You can just see that there are buds, but nothing is happening. Can you do something to stimulate that growth? This is one of the questions that is extremely hard to answer, and I don't have an exact answer, really. What I can say is that when you cut a Dracaena, only cut the Dracaena when it's feeling very well. When it's healthy, it's growing, it wants to become bigger, then you can cut it. What's going to happen is that you will get 1 up to 5 new buds. However, how many of those buds that are going to start to actually grow is also considering how you take care of the plant after you've cut it, and how much energy the plant has stored inside of it. Because when you cut off that cutting, you're actually taking away the sun panels. So the plant itself is not going to be able to generate even more energy, even more sugars, so that it can grow, continue to grow. So it has to rely on the stored energy that it has inside of the roots, inside of the trunk, and that determines how many of the buds that are actually going to start to grow. Because if the plant feels that, okay, I have a little bit energy, but not that much, then maybe just 1 of those 3 buds are going to start to grow. If it has an abundance of energy, it feels like it's going to explode, all of those 3 buds are going to start to grow, and they will start to grow at the same time. But it's not over, because if only 1 has started to grow, continue to make your plant feel well, because wherever there is a small bud area, you can always get a new growth from that point. So just continue to make it feel good, do as much as you can, give it a lot of light and a lot of love, and hopefully the other 2 will start to regenerate. But if you want to make a Dracaena create as much buds as possible, to be as thick as possible, always cut it when it feels really, really good, when you can see that it's growing, it's healthy. If you cut it when it's a little bit weak, you're only going to get 1 new bud and not get that thick one. Question number 5. I live in Germany, and here they advise me to put the plant in Pumice substrate. And since I've changed, I see that the plant has dried out and the leaves are getting less green. Okay, this is really, really important, because in some countries they use soil. In some countries they use something like the Pumice substrate, or otherwise known as hydroculture. And we use none of those. We use pumice to plant our plants in. And these are 3 very different types of planting. And especially the hydroponic version, as she's talking about here. The hydroponics works as such as the plant lives in water all the time. The Pumice substrate around the roots are only there for one function, that is to bind the roots together so that the plant will stand up straight. Because the plant has water roots, and it needs to be standing in water all the time. So if you take a plant that has been grown in soil, take away the soil and repot it as a hydroponic plant, that plant will not survive, because that plant does not have water roots. If you use hydroponic, you need to buy hydroponic plants that has been started in hydroponics all the way since it's been younger, or at least since it's been in the greenhouse. It needs to be a hydroponic plant. You cannot take a soil plant or a plant that has been placed in pumice and put it in a hydroponic system. That will not work. And it sounds like that is what has happened here. You've bought a normal plant that has been potted in soil, and then you have repotted it as a hydroponic plant. That will not work. And also, if you use hydroponics, now we are nowhere near experts on hydroponics, so I will not go further into it, but one of the things with hydroponics is that since you don't have any soil, and it's in the soil that you have all the nutrients for the plants, you don't have that in hydroponics. You have to be very, very careful of adding the nutrients with the water inside a hydroponic system. And if you don't do that, if you only fill up with water all the time and don't control the nutrients in that water, this is what will happen. The whole plant will start to fade because the photosynthesis in the plant is not working because it's not getting the nutrients. It's not going to work as well. So I hope that answers your question. I think that is what's happened here. So if you want to have a hydroponic system, be sure to buy plants that have been planted in hydroponics from the beginning. Then it works perfectly. It's a very good system. Question number 6. Does using Pumice reduce the risk of pests in your plants? Also, is it easier to rid plants of pests while using Pumice? Excellent question. And the answer for the first question, do you reduce the risk of pests in Pumice? The easy question is no, you're not. However, since our experience is that the plant will feel better, be healthier, have nicer root system, it will be lesser prone to get pests. So it's not the Pumice itself that is going to do something to reduce the risk of pests, but it's that the plant will feel so much better that it will not be attacked by pests. So the straight answer is no, but the result is yes. Okay? And so, is it easier to rid plants of pests while using Pumice? No, it's not. If you have gotten pests on your plant, it will be the same to get them to go away if you use hydroponics, if you use soil, or if you use Pumice. You have to do the same things. Just try and get some kind of pesticide and follow the instructions to the bone. Okay, question number 7. How's Pumice comparable to clay pebbles or hydrotons? Now, I think this is concerning what we use in hydroponics, these small burnt clay balls that we here in Sweden call leka, or as you say here, hydrotons. You cannot compare that to Pumice, and you cannot exchange Pumice for hydrotons, or ceramis, I think it's sometimes called as well. And that is because they have completely different functions and they work completely different with water. A pumice stone is very fragile and have small caves in it. It's and when it reacts to water, it sucks up a little bit of water, but it also has a lot of air inside of it. The clay pebble doesn't. It works completely different. So no, you cannot exchange those two. I would never use them together or separately as the same thing. However, you use that hydroton in hydroponics. But the only function the hydroponics has, the hydrotons have in hydroponics, is to hold the roots and keep the plant straight. Because it's the water that does all the work there. In pumice is used like soil. It's a substitution for soil. So you also have the advantage of that you have a lot of air at the same time as water. Question number 8. And the question is, where I live in France, I buy my pumice from IKEA, and they only have a very small type of pumice, that the corn size is smaller. And does that alter the quality of the pumice, or should I have bigger pumice like you have, she says. Well, now this is the pumice we use, and that is actually a variation of sizes. As you can see here, there are sizes that are only 1 millimeter big, up to maybe almost a centimeter big. So we have a variation of sizes. Now what this does is that it alters how water reacts to the pumice. If you had pumice that were maybe 3 centimeters big, only that type of pumice, it would not be able to suck up as much water, because the capillary force in that, with so big grain sizes, would not be very hard. The water cannot be transported up. But if you have very, very small pieces of pumice, the water will transport itself quite a long way. So that is the big difference if you use different sizes of pumice, because all of the pumice has the same function inside of it, but the water works differently depending on the sizes of the grains you use. So I would recommend you to blend the pumice and use a blend that is between 1 millimeter up to maybe 1 or 1.5 millimeter in size of the pumice, and mix that up. So you get a perfect amount of water inside of the stones and also in between the stones, because the capillary force will also be in between the stones. Question number 9. Can I use only pumice? Now this is one of the most common questions we get. Yes, you can use only pumice, but you have to add something to the pumice. What I mean by only pumice, you don't have to mix the pumice with soil or mix it with some hydrotons like we heard before or something. However, you can not only buy clean, sterilized pumice and use only that. The mixture we use, as I said before, is a mixture of like a lot of pumice and a little bit of clay. There is a little bit clay mixed with the pumice, and also some long-term nutrient pellets as well. Now why is that? Well, the fast and simple answer is like this, because when you try and add nutrients to pumice, you usually do that by adding nutrients to the water, and then you water the nutrients over the pumice. The pumice itself does not have the ability to, because it does not have the ability to lock on to the nutrients. It will just fall through and be in the bottom of the pot together with the water. And since the nutrients is a salt, if you have a lot of salt down in that salt water, you can get problems. So what you want is that the nutrients, when you water, they're going to stay in the pumice. And how do you do that? Well, you add some clay, because clay has the function of, it's a little bit electric charge. So it will collect, you can say, it will add the nutrients, the salt, to its body, and be all around inside together with the pumice. So you won't get salt water down in the bottom, the excess water, because the salt will be absorbed by the clay inside of the pumice, or together with the pumice. So pumice, clay, or some substitute that can do the same thing as clay, and also, it's not bad to use some long-term nutrient pellets as well to give that little extra push, of course. So yes, you can use only pumice, but you have to mix something in that can absorb or keep the nutrients that you add in the pumice. Okay? Question number 10. Can scoria be used instead of pumice? Now, scoria is also a volcanic rock. But it is a volcanic rock. The pumice is the volcanic rock that shoots out of a volcano first. It's the lightest form of volcanic rock. That is why it's so porous. It has small caves in it. That's what we want. One of the second thing that comes after the pumice is actually the scoria. It's still a volcanic rock, but it's a little bit harder, a little bit heavier, and it's not as porous. It doesn't have these small excavations, these small grots, these small caves inside of it. So no, it does not have the same function. Now I know that scoria is used mixed with pumice for, like say, succulents or plants that does not want to have as much water as a regular plant. Succulents needs very little water. So if you mix up the pumice with some scoria, it will mean that the pumice and scoria mixture will not be as wet as if you only had pumice. But using only scoria does not have the same function as using only pumice. Question number 11. Can you use pumice only when you grow from seed? No, I would not recommend that. Only use pumice on a finished plant or a plant that has a complete root system. Do not use it from seed because it carries a little bit less of nutrients and a little bit less of water than, let's say, a seedling soil that you buy. So I think it could work for some seedlings, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend you to use some type of soil first, and when the roots have started to grow out fiercely, or you have a lot of root system, then you can repot it in pumice and have perfect results. But start in soil if you want from seedling. Question number 12. Have you kept the plants from your videos in clear glass containers, or was that just for demonstration purposes? And that it's quite funny because I think it's almost 2.5 years ago that we made the self-watering system video, and we made the All You Need to Know About Pumice video, and in that we used glass containers when we tried to show you how to do it. And yes, that was only for demonstration purposes. We do not use glass containers, almost never. And I'll show you why. I actually have this exact same plant here. This is the plant we planted 2.5 years ago in pumice, showing you how to use pumice. Now, it's been standing here in our office, and we haven't been taking care of it good, I have to admit. It's been standing in a dark room. We're only watering it when we see that it's almost dying, but it's still alive, and it looks like this. So I'm going to show you why we don't use a glass container for this. And it's because when the sun hits a glass container, you will develop algae inside of the container. That's inevitable. It will happen in pumice like this, it will happen in soil, it will happen in anything. You will get algae. And those algae will change your pH down in your system here. It will create a different environment for your plant. And in the long run, the plant will not like that. So this is only for demonstration purposes. I would not recommend you to plant in some type of glass. Plant it in a other type of pot that does not let the sun come in. I will also show you the plant that we planted also 2.5 years ago when we showed you how to make a self-watering system. One of the easiest way to make a self-watering system. Now, as you can see, the plant is actually growing and looking quite good. It's thriving still. Like I said, it's also been standing in the office, dark and been neglected, but it works. And you can see as well that it has a lot of roots down here. And all of these roots down with the ceramics here is water roots. So they wouldn't work if I took these and planted them in soil or pumice now, because it wants to be in water all the time. But The system works, you can see 2.5 years later, it's still looking fine and growing as well, in the simplest form of self-watering system. Until next time, hej då!